Hello, coming to you from one of the unparalleled cities of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Ambassador Bryce. Tied in with the popular recurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we play that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we are interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, Episode 15. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Castles of Mad King Ludwig out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off the Guardians of the Galaxy expansion for Legendary Marvel. On the reaction segment, I'll give my thoughts about the trends in the 2018 edition of the All-Time Designer Rankings Geek List. On the What I Have Been Playing segment, I review Blue Lagoon. On the Obscure Bryce Game segment, I review the Pez CCG. And on the Where's the Game Now segment, we take a look at Unearth. When I told my wife about the upcoming Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig from Stonemaier Games, she suggested we play Castles of Mad King Ludwig, which is one of her favorite games. It's one of my favorites too, and I've been considering bumping my current rating of a 9 or 9.5 to a perfect 10. That's how highly I think of this game. It's also one of the only games that I have a customized broken token insert for. There are a handful of games out there where an insert is an absolute essential element, and this is one of them. Anyway, that play wound up being an out-of-the-dust play for me. I last played the game 1 year, 1 month, and 6 days ago. Usually when I play a game, I'll know when I pull the game off the shelf if it's a dusty game or not. But this one was a genuine surprise. It was a 20-play game for me the year it came out, but it's obviously trickled off in the frequency of plays since then. I don't have an explanation for why. We used the expansion, like usual, in our play. It had some interesting elements to the game, but it's hardly what I would call an essential expansion that one must own. It also adds to the setup time, unfortunately, so I've taken to ignoring the rule about the specific quantity of base game and expansion buildings that must be in each stack. I just shuffle them all together and take the player count dependent number of tiles needed from each one. This means that in some games we might see a lot of the swan rooms, and in some games we might see few. We didn't see many in this particular game, but I think it's fun how that impacts the value of various buildings. Our game was really close, but I managed to come out ahead when my wife forgot about the endgame bonuses for the rooms that run out of tiles. I had more of those than she did, and it was just enough to put me over the top. I fancy myself pretty good at this game, and it's one of my answers when someone posts the question, "What game do you rarely lose?" in one of the various social media forums. I'd be surprised if this got dusty again for me, but stranger things have happened. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Tim Korchnoi, username Kato Sola, brought the Guardians of the Galaxy expansion for Legendary Marvel out of the dust. He writes, I pulled up my Legendary set, I have most of the expansions plus the base game, for the first time in over a year and a half. I wanted something light and easy to play as my wife was reaching the end of her pregnancy, and who knew when would be making that dash to the hospital. I did a series of matches consisting of 5 games each against Thanos with different teams. Team 1 consisted of Thor, Black Widow, Iron Man, Captain America, and Rocket Raccoon. They didn't fare so well, going 1-4. My second team I called the Battle of Tishin Team, and consisted of Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Iron Man, Star-Lord, and Drax. They did much better, going 4-1. I'm still finishing with my third team, my Marvel favorites, consisting of Spider-Man, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Daredevil, and Rocket Raccoon. So far, they're 0-3, but 2 games have been maddeningly close. Thanks for the contribution, Tim. This is a fun idea for how to play Legendary, to construct various teams and see how they fare against a particular villain in a series of matches. I don't have any of the expansions myself, but it makes me want to track some of them down and try something similar. Reaction segment time. One of my favorite recurring geek lists on BGG is the annual All-Time Designer Ranking Geek List, which ranks the top 100 all-time designers, living or dead, based upon a very complicated formula that takes into account the quantity of games they have in the top 1,000 of BGG, and how highly those games are ranked. The compiler of the list, a user by the name of Tony Chen, describes the formula used this way. The formula has two components. The first component is a game's raw rating based on its BGG ranking. The second component is a discount factor for being game number whatever by that specific designer. Essentially, any game by a designer in the top 1,000 will add positively to a designer's score, but the lower-ranked games in that spectrum for a designer with lots of titles present won't count so much, which prevents a prolific designer with lots of top 1,000 titles from impossibly eclipsing a newer designer with maybe just a handful of very impressive top 100 titles. Those interested in the specific math can take a look at the Geek List, where the formula is written out in notation form. It's a formula that has been tweaked and tested and seems to yield valid results of the top designers making an impact on the hobby, even if they're no longer among the living. I also like that the designer scores from the previous year are listed as well, so we can see how designer is trending one way or the other. There's a lot of interesting information I could talk about in this Geek List, but I'm going to pull out some highlights. First, using this formula, the number one designer is Cory Konitska. That might be a surprise to some people until you go down his extensive list of impactful titles, including Star Wars Rebellion, Star Wars Imperial Assault, Battlestar Galactica, just to name a few, and realize just how consistent Cory has been in releasing big-hit games. His newest hit, Twilight Imperium 4th Edition, caused a score to increase from last year, when he was also number one. Increasing one's score is actually pretty tough using this formula because of the high quantity of games that move in and out of the top 1,000, and the number of new designers or designers with just a few significant hits that are part of those mover and shakers. His score of 1,036 is a full 100 points better than the number 2 designer on the list, Uwe Rosenberg. But I think Uwe will cut into that lead some next year as Nusfjord continues to rise in the rankings. Reykjavik might have time to make an impact as well, depending on how quickly the planned Essen release makes it over to the States. The prolific Reiner Knizia is at number 3 with 821 points, but lost some points in his score and might be in danger of being overtaken by number 4 Bruno Cathala, whose score of 781 increased from last year significantly, and who seems intent on trying to match Knizia's early productivity with multiple games coming out with his name on the box. My boy Stefan Feld seems locked in at number 5 with a score of 748. Those points are down a lot from last year, and Cathala actually overtook him for these 2018 rankings. Vlada Shavatal is at a distant number 6 with a score of 665, and also lost points from last year, despite the success of Codenames Duet. It's interesting to note how dominant the top designers are in their scores. The top 11 all have scores over 400, but the rest of the 89 designers on the top 100 list all have scores beneath 400. Even a designer like Jamie Stegmaier, who has released nothing but hits, has a score under 400. There's a lot of interesting data in this list to react to. I think I'll pull some more choice tidbits from it for the next episode. In the What I Have Been Playing segment this week, I'm going to tell you about Reiner Knizia's new game, Blue Lagoon. My friend Warren got this at Gen Con and taught it to me a couple of weeks ago. Spielbound, Omaha's board game cafe, got a copy for their library, and I, in turn, taught it to some other friends this last weekend. Here's how this route building and set collection game works. Players start off with a certain number of double-sided settler and canoe tokens and 5 wooden huts. On their turn, they can place one of these pieces on the hex grid map. In the first half of the game, players can place canoes anywhere, but all other pieces must be placed next to an adjacent piece belonging to the player. In this way, players create routes connecting the various islands on the map and try to reach resource spaces with their routes, collecting tokens when they do so. A scoring round is triggered when all of one player's settler/canoe tokens are in play, or when all of the resource tokens have been claimed, whichever happens first. Players then score points depending on the number of islands they're connected to, majorities on the various islands, sets of like resources, and sets of different resources. Then, players remove all of their pieces except for their wooden huts, which become the starting spaces for the route networks in the second half of the game, which works exactly like the first, and triggers the same kind of scoring round the same way. It's an elegant system and provides many interesting decisions along the way. Route building and set collection are a couple of my favorite mechanics anyway, but I really like how they are combined in Blue Lagoon. Apparently I'm not very good at this particular game though, as I keep finishing a distant third or fourth. There are about 8 or so different ways to score points, and I keep getting fixated on either the route building ones or the set collecting ones, and have yet to figure out how to combine them most effectively. But I keep having fun with this game. Knizia is the most prolific designer on the planet and has been designing games for a long, long time. But, remarkably, I think he's getting even better with age because he's been on fire the last few years. Between Quest for El Dorado and this one, Knizia, who I've been lukewarm on in general in years past, is now a designer I'm paying more attention to, and his new games are ones I'm going to continue to look forward to trying. Obscure Bryce game segment time. This week I'm going to tell you about one of my trademark obscure Bryce games, Pez the card game. I mentioned this game briefly in an early episode describing my history with CCGs, but didn't go into too much detail about it then. I'll do that now. The game has a fascinating history. Pez the card game is an early design from Mike Fitzgerald and was released at the height of the trading card game craze in the year 2000 by US Games. But it didn't make any sense for this game to be marketed as a CCG. Like the equally unsuccessful SimCity CCG, Pez used a common deck between the players. There was a rarity system to Pez, but there wasn't any logical order to it. The rare cards weren't any better than the common ones because they all served the same function, and they all seemed to operate under a similar mathematical consistency. As far as I could tell, this game only exists because the publisher had the brilliant idea that, hey, a lot of people collect Pez dispensers, and a lot of people collect these new CCG things. I'll bet these two things will go together really great. But unsurprisingly, the game came and went very quickly. It never spawned any expansions. But this wasn't because the game was bad. There were a lot of CCGs over the years that were pretty decent, but didn't stand a chance in a crowded market from the get-go. Pez was a quality game, and it failed because it was never promoted. Only became aware of its existence because I happened to stumble upon a starter deck and a booster box for a few bucks in one of the now extinct KB Toys outlet stores about 17 years ago or so. Hey, I'll try just about anything if the price is right, and the creepy animate vintage Pez dispensers in the box art caught my attention. Here's how it works. There are two decks, a huge flavor deck consisting of multiple copies of orange, grape, lemon, and strawberry Pez cards, and a dispenser deck consisting of a bunch of Pez dispensers that list a stack of flavors you need to create to fill the dispenser and score it, and how many points it is worth when you do so. Players work with a 5-card hand of flavors and a common display of dispensers. On a player's turn, they can use 2 actions, Martin Wallace style, from a menu of 5 actions, and repeat the same one twice for both actions if they want to. Players can claim a dispenser from the display by playing the top flavor card of the dispenser's flavor stack, and put it in front of them, fill a dispenser in front of them by playing the next flavor in the stack, discard a flavor from their hand to discard the most recently played flavor from an opposing dispenser stack, draw a card, or wipe the dispenser display and refill it. At the end of a player's turn, they draw 2 cards and discard down to 5 if needed. Multiple cards of the same flavor can be played as part of the same claim, fill, or discard action, and if a player manages to play the last card of their hand, they draw 5 new cards immediately. The first player to score 25 points worth of dispensers wins. It was an elegant system and weirdly fun. Mike Fitzgerald liked it enough that he later re-implemented it in his game Banana Split, which actually wasn't any more successful than Pez was. At least Pez had the benefit of a vintage art style that was delightfully creepy. I used to break this game out at the end of a hardcore multi-hour session of Star Wars or Lord of the Rings CCG. Nowadays, if I'm in a group and no one knows what to play next, I'll suggest Pez. As someone wants to play something really obscure or unusual, Pez is my go-to game. With enough dispenser cards and maybe an extra flavor deck, the game could even theoretically accommodate any number of players. For a while, the only place you could get this game, besides an outlet store like I did, was the Pez Visitor Center in Connecticut. I have no idea if they still have a hidden stash of Pez CCG in a corner somewhere they sell very rarely to someone. But a starter deck, which is the only way to get the flavor deck, it comes with a dispenser booster pack, or some random individual boosters will occasionally come up on eBay every now and then.